Hello, hello, hello. And I tell you, I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm excited about this episode, this series, this launch. I am super, super excited. I even put on some lipstick for this one. All right. Hey, everybody. I hope all is well. This is Kendall Anise, the Remix Coach. And today is the launch of Rewatch Girlfriends with Me. Now, Girlfriends is one of my favorite shows ever. I was asked today, well, do you like Girlfriends over Living Single? I was like, well, why do we have to compare? I know all black women, but they're different and I like them both for different reasons. But I love Girlfriends because first of all, I don't even know why it's called a sitcom, because there are a lot of serious issues going on Girlfriends, right? Girlfriends started September 2000, and I remember sitting in front of the television waiting for it to start. Now, I'm not going to lie, the first time I watched Girlfriends, the first season, first episode, I was like, oh no, thing is going to last. But I stuck with it, and I'm so glad I did. I stuck with Girlfriends, and I stuck through all the way through 8 seasons, and I loved every moment of it. Then when it came to DVD, I was like, I got to get all 8 seasons. So I would watch Girlfriends all the time. At any given time, it would be in my DVD player waiting for me to press play. That's just what it was, because that was a comfort show. That was a familiar show. That was something that I gained knowledge from. It made me laugh. It made me think. It made me, emotional. There were a lot of different emotional episodes of it. And it was just a comfort show for me. Then what? A year ago, maybe 2, it came to Netflix and it got a whole new audience, whole new fan base. And I didn't have to pull out my DVDs. I could watch it. So my daughter both of them watch rewatch shows, right? And my oldest daughter was like, I don't understand why you don't review and do a rewatch for Girlfriends. I was like, duh, it's a no-brainer, but I didn't think about it. And then my other daughter, my youngest daughter, was on board too, because she loves rewatch shows and rewatch podcasts. So I said, as a life coach, as a woman of a certain age, someone who was watching it from the beginning and know all the episodes, I was like, definitely going to do it and give my take. I decided to start, and I'm just giving you information. So each episode that I do on Rewatch Girlfriends with Me, I won't have to do the preliminaries in the beginning. I'll get straight to it. But since this is the first episode, I want to give some insight. Okay, so I decided not to start with season 1. I wanted to go straight into season 2 for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is some of the first episode, I was like, oh, I wanted the meatier side of things. So in part of season 1, and then all the way to season 8, is some meat and potatoes in these episodes. Yes, it'll make you laugh, but also make you think, and you can relate as a woman. And the men could probably relate to William, because we ain't gonna forget about William. But also in college, when I went back to college in my 40s, give me 1 second, my light just fell. Give me 1 second. Come pick up this light, honey. Because I was originally going to go live in my case. If you can pick that light up. All right. So in college, I decided to do a presentation on Girlfriends, and it was a therapy session. And it was a lot of meat in there. So I was like, I got to do this. And it was a therapy class, a professional helper class, and I used girlfriends as my presentation. So I'm going to start with season 2, episodes 1 and 2, and we're going to go through scene by scene, and we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to talk about girlfriends. This is the first episode of Rewatch Girlfriends with me. All right, enough of all the background talk. I want to get right into it. But tell me, who loves Girlfriends? Do y'all love Girlfriends as much as I do? Do you love watching the show? Do you still watch it? Did you rediscover it since it's been on Netflix? Or do you have the DVDs like me? All right. So, I'm wondering, should I give background on Girlfriends and all of that? I guess this first episode, maybe I'll do that and then go right into it. And then I'm not going to be before you long. All right. So Girlfriends has 8 seasons. It started in 2000, September 11th, 2000. It was created by Mara Brock Akil. It's a spinoff from The Game. Many people don't know that. Well, the spinoff is The Game, right? From Girlfriends. So everybody loves The Game and Girlfriends. All right. It originally aired on UPN and the CW. Enough of that. Let's get into it. All right. So season 2 starts. It came out September 10th, 2001. So season 2 starts with Darnell, right? It was funny about it. The intro, this is the intro because y'all know they changed their clothes several times depending on the season, right? And this is where they had the blue jeans. This is where they had the blue and red, right? The intro. They were still not Maya, Joan, Lynn, and Tony like we knew in season 7 and 8. They were just coming into the characters and feeling their own. I think season 2 is when they really started developing into and enveloping into the characters. So season 2 started with, well, let me tell you a little bit of where season 1 ended. So season 1 ended with Greg, which is Tony's boyfriend then. She was cheating on him, and Joan slipped up and told him. She didn't know he didn't know. She thought that she told him, and it slipped up, and Joan told Greg that Tony was cheating on her. So even though Joan was with Sean, she was like, I got to make it right with my friend. She's sad. She's depressed. So we're going to go to Jamaica. And Sean was like, well, wait a minute. You just going to leave? This is the end of season 1. You just going to leave me to go? She's like, I got to be with her. I got to make it right. This is my best friend. You know, she's feeling this way. And even though it was Tony's fault, and we'll get into that. And they all went to Jamaica. So season 2 starts with a recap of what happened in season 1. And they're back from Jamaica. And the funniest intro when it first comes on is Maya is telling Darnell about what happened in Jamaica and all Tony's drama. But what we see is there's a new Darnell. This is not the same Darnell that was in season 1. This is a totally different. That was Flex Alexander, but then he got one-on-one and had to bounce from Girlfriends. And then Khalil Kane, who we know as Darnell from season 2 all the way to season 8, and even now to this day, that's Darnell, right? So she's telling this new one. They don't address, just like they changed Jabari in season 8, but we're going to talk about that later. But it's so interesting because they don't even acknowledge it. They just get right to it. And she's telling Darnell what happens. And Maya tells Darnell about what happens with Joan and what happens with Tony. And Maya gets a Brazilian wax for the time. He's telling her Jamaica, but then he also notices she gets a Brazilian wax. So he's like, wait a minute, you're changing now. These women that you've been hanging with lately, you never changed. You never ran off to Jamaica. You never got a Brazilian wax. Like, who is this new Maya? So he's kind of struggling with that. And that happens in the first scene. And then they go to Tony. So Tony and Joan are at Joan's house. Well, let's just say Joan walks in, right? She walks into into her house, and she sees Sean, Joan's boyfriend, and Tony on the couch. Tony is barely dressed. Sean has his shorts on. And Joan walks in, and Sean jumps up. It's not what you think. It's not what you think. And Joan says, what I think is Tony tried to sleep with you to get back at me. And he's like, I guess it is what he thinks. And this is played by Dondre Whitfield. Sean is. So it's interesting because you can start to see the toxic behavior. Like, Joan comes in. How does she think it's okay? How can she rationalize it? That's her boyfriend and that's her best friend, and she's barely dressed. She has like a bra and underwear on. And how does Joan go straight to Tony and say, what are you doing? She accepts it for the most part, which you start to see the toxic behavior that Joan and Tony have together. So then it goes on to Joan falling back into this toxic cycle, forgiving Tony and for the unthinkable. Totally forgives her right away and blames herself, even though it's still Tony's fault because she cheated on her boyfriend. It's not Joan's fault that she accidentally told. It is Tony's fault for her behavior. But you'll start to see the patterns where Joan makes excuses for Tony's behavior. So Joan and Sean are saying their goodbyes because he's getting ready to go to New York. He gives her the two-way pagers. Y'all remember that back in the day. And he tells Joan, anyone who would do this is not a friend. And then, of course, Joan makes excuses for Tony, as she always does. So Joan still says that that's her best friend. She's wearing those blinders right now. She cannot see. So then they go into the law office, and Maya finds out about let's get to that later. So she's there. Joan and Maya are talking, and she's telling her about Darnell and how she got the Brazilian wax, and she wanted to know if she thought that she changed because her husband is telling her she changed. So while they're in there having that conversation, Yvonne and William walk in. So Yvonne and William walk in, and of course, Yvonne says that she's engaged because if you recall in season 1, Yvonne went to Jamaica and William didn't want to lose Yvonne, so he chased after her in Jamaica. So William proposed to Yvonne so she would stay with him and kind of buy time. What do y'all think? Because it's almost like he made her stay with him, because that's the thing, like they think every woman wants a ring, and if I just propose, I can buy my time and I can stay a little while longer because she has a ring after all, right? But what gets even hotter and deeper is William wants her to quit the job at the police force. So it's almost like Yvonne exchanges her ring for her job. And that's something that she loves to do as a police officer. But William thinks it's too dangerous, so he gives her a ring. So now he gives her a ring. And then the women look like, what? You quitting your job? So I want to ask you, do you think women settle to say, I do? Think about it. Y'all, this is the first episode, so it's going to get gooder and gooder. I'm just trying to lay it out, trying to figure out how I want to lay it out. So bear with me. All right, so then they go on to the Japanese restaurant. So y'all know every season has a different spot that they go to. The Blue Bar, going down. We're going jumping ahead seasons, but different ones. So this season is they were focused on that Japanese restaurant where eventually Lynn starts to work. So that's their communal space. So in the restaurant, Maya and Lynn find out what Tony did to Joan trying to sleep with Sean. And of course, Maya was trying to say, "Oh hell no," right? But Lynn said it for her. So Joan is trying to change the subject. She doesn't want to hear it because she knows that it's not right, but she accepts it because that's Tony. So Tony brushes her off. Tony just brushes off her bad behavior per usual, doesn't accept responsibility, blames somebody else. Y'all already know how Tony does. She does. No one holds her accountable. They say that's Tony, and they allow her bad behavior to continue. Joan is used to it, and because it's become the norm. You know how sometimes in friendships it becomes the norm. This person is good for this person is good for that, and it becomes the norm. And that's what we see happening here. So you can see the buildup. Mara Brocka-Kill wrote this episode, so you can see the buildup and what they're going to do, because they want you to question it. Are they really friends? Is it codependent? Is it toxic? What's going on with this friendship? And you teach people how to treat you. And this is the dynamic of Joan and Tony. This is how it's always been. And it starts to play out. So Joan is stressing out and her hair begins to fall out. And over the stress from Tony and trying to figure out if she's a friend, should she keep her, what's going on? And then the other ladies are like, no, this is unacceptable, but Joan can't see it. And Lynn suggests therapy to Joan because of the stress, her hair's falling out, all of that. So then they go to the next scene. Maya and Darnell, they have a conversation about Maya changing once again. But this is the thing. He got with Maya at 17 years old. And now she's fully grown. They got a child. She got a job. She got some friends. And she's not going to be the same. So sometimes people do influence you for the better, right? Sometimes people influence you, and it may not be how you want it to shape and influence you, but that's what happens, right? So if she tried a Brazilian wax, like she's changing, no, she's evolving, but sometimes people don't see it that way. So then they leave Darnell and Maya, and they go into Joan's therapist office, Mr. Percy Bales, right? And this is the kind of the presentation that I started when I was in college, and I ended up doing kind of a case study on this and presenting this. But they're in the therapist's office. Joan takes Lynn's advice and she goes to seek therapy. Now you have to understand that this was 20 plus years ago, right? 23 years ago, 22 years ago to be exact. And now we hear about therapy often. We hear about toxicity. We hear about people being poisonous, setting boundaries. We hear about all of that readily now. If you go on social media, if you go to Google, if you're watching YouTube, anything, we hear it. But you have to keep in mind, back then, this wasn't common conversation. Everybody wasn't like, oh, I got my therapist appointment on Wednesday at 5:00. Nobody was talking about that then. So this show was really groundbreaking, talking about, these real issues, right? So we're sitting in a therapist's office. Percy Bales is a white man, but Percy, I never heard of a Percy that wasn't a black guy. So that's funny in itself. She said, do I call you Percy or do I call you Mr. Bales? So Joan is on the couch and her hair begins to fall out in the office. And she talks about her hair falling out. And Bales is like, well, you need a dermatologist. She said, I did go to a dermatologist and they sent me to you because it's not what's on my head, it's what's in my head. And Dr. Bales gets right to it as a therapist. He's like, why is your hair falling out? And then Joan begins to tell Dr. Bales about Tony and their history. Next scene, they go to Tony. Tony jumps out of her car. She sees that her signage has changed. Y'all know she's a realtor. She specializes in results, and her advertisements are being covered and pulled, and she's struggling at her job. So they show Tony in distress. So then they go back to the therapist's office, and Joan runs down everything about Tony. And Joan says, I was 8 years old when I met Tony, and she was there for me when no one liked her. She even set me up with my first boyfriend, and she made people like her. So that was something that she was indebted. And this is what Dr. Bales says. He said, you think you owe her just because she was there for you when you were 8 years old? And he said, why do you put her feelings before yours? And I love the fact that they were making this real, like asking real questions. And if you were watching and you may have toxic friendship, you start to see what's happening in the dynamics with Joan and Tony. And Dr. Bell straight calls it. He said, this friendship sounds like poison. And he said, do you really want poison in your life? No, we're not talking about Bell Biv DeVoe poison, BBD. He said poison. He straight called a thing a thing. He said it. He was like, she sounds like poison. So she begins. And of course, Joan's nature is to what? Take up for Tony, as she always does. And makes her think. So they leave us there, and then they go to Joan's house, right? So this is where the engagement party is going on. So Joan promised to give, when she found out William and Yvonne were engaged, she promised to give an engagement party. But everybody's at the engagement party. Well, not everybody, just the girls and William and Yvonne. And she comes in like coming in fussing and has her mind trying to figure out some things because she just leaves therapy. So Joan rushes in her home, and she lashes out. I can't believe Tony is not here for one of my closest friends' engagement party. And William, like, you barely made an appearance yourself. But she starts to lash out because what Dr. Bales was telling her is starting to resonate, and she's thinking about their relationship. So she's automatically on 10, and she's lashing out, talking about Tony, and Tony's not there. And then she begins to say that my therapist said, and Maya says the line that a lot of Black people were saying. They're not saying it now, but back then she was like, Black people don't go to therapy, they go to church. But think about how things have changed, right? Where people now are encouraging and recommending therapy, but that's not how it was going down then. And plus, if you went to therapy back then, you weren't publicly saying it. It was just something that was on the hush. But now it's not like that. But back then it was. And then, so after the scene at Joan's, they go to Tony. So Joan comes in because she's going to tell Tony what she really thinks for her not coming to the engagement party. Then she got on her mind what Dr. Bales said. So all of this is swarming and swirling around in her head. So she gets to Tony's house, and Tony is having a meltdown because her car is getting repoed outside. So she's yelling out the window, and Joan is trying to tell her, I need to back away from you. We can't have this toxic relationship. That's what Joan wants to tell her. But once again, they fall back into that toxic friend circle. And Tony is like, just tell me something that I need to hear to help me. And she's like, we're going to get through this. And she's like, that's all you got? So already it's that manipulation that Tony is doing. So then she's like, I need you, as a friend once again. So Joan falls right back into it. And even though she goes over there to break the friendship, the toxicity starts again, and Tony needs Joan again, and Joan gives in, and the same cycle happens. So she never tells Tony what she really thinks. They get back to the therapist's office. Once they get back to the therapist's office, the question is asked by Dr. Bales. Did you end the friendship with Tony? Joan lies and says yes. She can't do it. So she just says yes because she doesn't want to hear Dr. Bell say, you're wrong. You need to do this. She doesn't want to hear it. And she doesn't know what to do. And she's torn literally between herself and Tony. So episode 1, season 2, episode 1 stops right there. So what do you think about that? Let's have a conversation in the comments. What do you think about that? Do you think that she should have gone over there to break it off with Tony as a friend? Or do you think that she should have helped her through her darkest time? Because what Joan was doing is sacrificing her peace, her mental health, her emotional stability, and she was stressing out. Her hair was falling out, right? But she still wanted to be there because she didn't want to disappoint Tony. So it ends there. And now we're going into season 2, episode 2, which aired September 17th, 2001. So it starts off in the law office. Maya and William are talking about his engagement to Yvonne. Then Joan and William at the law office are talking about therapy. And Joan confesses and confides in William and said, have you ever lied to your therapist? And he's like, I'm just offended that you assume that I got a therapist. And she not even paying attention to that. She's like, because I lied to my therapist about ending my friendship with Tony. And William's like, well, all I lied about is traffic on the 405. Like, you really, lied to him, because she couldn't tell her therapist that she didn't have the courage to end the friendship. So Maya said she wouldn't need to even go to therapy if she ended the friendship with Tony. Maya's like, you doing all this therapy and all the problem is Tony. End the relationship with Tony and save yourself some money, and you don't have to go to therapy. And of course, Joan ain't trying to hear that, because Tony is her girl. They've developed this codependent relationship as a friendship. And the relationship is Tony needs, uses, leans on Joan, and Joan accepts any bad behavior Tony has because she's obligated to her, because she helped her when she was 8 years old. That's pretty much what it is. And it goes in a circle. And this is one of the first times we hear Maya talk about Ronnie and Peaches doing their hair at situations, at the hair. And then we know later that goes deeper and deeper and deeper as we go into the different seasons. All right. So they circle back to the therapist's office. And Joan talks, she's talking to Maya. And Maya starts talking about, now this is the thing. So this is, Joan starts to see the cycle with herself. She starts to see how people take advantage. She loosely sees, and then when she goes into the therapist's office, he really shows her. But Maya is talking, Joan has some stuff to do as a lawyer. And Maya's like, well, I'm not going to be here because I got to go get my hair done, and it's going to take about 4 hours. Now, this is in the middle of the workday, and Joan is her boss. But people around her are taking advantage of her kindness and her inability to say no. So stick with me with this. So then they go into Dr. Bell's office again. So they just want to show you how Joan's same patterns and behavior is spreading across her friendships, right? And she's in common with them. So she's the only one who is her behavior is the same way. I'll say that. So Dr. Bales is saying, so she starts to tell Dr. Bales about Maya, right? And just talking about the things that are happening at work. And Dr. Bales said, why have you maintained such an unhealthy friendship, relationship with Tony for so long? So she talks a little bit about about Maya. But then he comes straight. See, I like Dr. Bales in this therapist office because Dr. Bales is not playing any games. He goes straight to the chaser. Hey, he goes straight to it. And he's like, why have you maintained such an unhealthy relationship with Tony for so long? Let's get right to it. And Joan's not used to being called on her stuff, right? As an attorney, as a businesswoman, as the nurturer of her friendship group, she's not used to being called on her stuff. So Joan tries to justify why she maintains an unhealthy relationship with Tony. She starts to give all these reasons why she's maintaining this unhealthy relationship. Dr. Bales, let me tell y'all something. Y'all need a therapist like Dr. Bales. Dr. Bales said Tony is a narcissist. Tony is toxic. Tony is a sociopath. He straight up says it. And Joan continues to lie about ending the friendship with Tony. But based off of some of the things that Joan is telling him about Tony, she's like, she's a narcissist. Like, why are you? So Joan continues to lie about ending the friendship with Tony. She continues to do it. And Dr. Bell says, it's so interesting that usually when I give this assignment to my clients, it takes months for them to end a relationship that they've had for so long. And I'm just surprised that you ended this type of relationship in one day. And of course, Joan's looking like, I'm lying, but I'm not going to say I'm lying. And it has her thinking. And she's lying to the therapist, and she's caring about Tony's feelings more than she's caring about hers. Hair falling out, she's stressed out, but she's going to keep lying about ending the friendship. So then they go to Joan's house. Now here's where the patterns happen again. We see where Maya was trying to take advantage of Joan, 4 hours getting her hair done during the workday, right? So now we see how Joan is still in the same position with her friends. So we see how Lynn takes advantage. You already know Lynn takes advantage, but we're on season 2. We don't know what happens later on, but we know if we watched it, right? So it's interesting. So Joan gets home, and we see that, well, we don't see that part yet. So we see that Lynn sneaks Vasco into Joan's apartment house from Jamaica. So we see that she's totally taken advantage. She done snuck this man in Joan's house. Joan sees, Joan doesn't know, and she's not dressed. She comes into the kitchen and she sees Vasco from Jamaica. Remember the end of season 1, Lynn said she was staying in Jamaica because she was going to sell jet skis on the beach, and she found, a man, and she liked the life, and that's what she was going to do. Well, Vasco was in her house, Joan's house, for a week. And Lynn thought that was okay to take advantage of her friend that way, because she knew that Joan was going to be like, it's okay. She's already putting Lynn up for free, and now putting somebody up for free. So we see that dynamic right there with another friend. So this is the third friend. So then they're back at the restaurant. So we have Joan and Tony at the restaurant. Joan tries to help Tony with leads. So she's still trying to help her because she's down on her luck with her job. So she's trying to help her. So Tony falls back into what she does is Tony buys Joan by buying her stuff. So she's like, I saw 2 pair of shoes and I saw this and I knew you would want this. So she's buying Joan with stuff. And Joan is like, you can't even afford that. You're losing your job. You can't. But that's the dynamic. Tony buys Joan some stuff, and then it buys her more time with Joan. And she's trying to buy her by buying her stuff, right? And it goes on next to Maya and William. So Maya is making sure William is ready to be engaged. She's giving him, that's like the soft spot of this episode. Because with the episode, it can't just be deep, deep, deep. They got to have a soft spot. And that soft spot is William and Yvonne getting married and engaged. and Maya testing him to see if he's ready by putting other women in his path to see. So that's the soft spot of this episode. So then they go into so they're still at the restaurant, and Joan and Tony are still there. And guess who walks in the restaurant? Dr. Bales. And Dr. Bales sees Joan, immediately speaks to Joan. Now, he didn't say he was a therapist because you know it's client doctor privilege, right? Therapist privilege. So confidentiality. So he didn't say, and she says, "Hey, Dr. Bales." And then Tony, of course, introduces herself, Tony. And Joan is like, that's another Tony, because she's embarrassed because she lied to Dr. Bales and said that she broke it off with Tony, right? So now she's busted. He comes in the restaurant, and when he comes in the restaurant, she don't know what to say. So she's trying to be quick on her feet. And then, of course, Dr. Bales goes to sit down. And Tony's like, "How many Tonys do you know?" And she's naming, "I know Tony, Tony, Tony." She's naming all these Tonys. And Joan tells Tony at that point that it's her therapist, and she's seeing a therapist because of her. And of course, Tony's ego, Tony's toxic behavior, Tony's narcissism, she ain't trying to hear that. She like, "You ain't seeing no therapist because of me, because ain't nothing wrong with me," right? So Tony, this is where it starts, that gaslighting. Tony be gaslighting Joan for real. So Tony tries to talk Joan out of therapy, saying, "Joan, you don't need therapy. You don't need that." And she starts gaslighting her. And it's so clear. Like when you look back, you're like, wow. When you rewatch it, you're like, dang, she was gaslighting her. "You don't need no therapist. Ain't nothing wrong with you." And then Joan is used to being emotionally manipulated by Tony. So she starts to believe it. Tony says this. Tony says, "It's me and you. Get rid of that therapist. He's poison." So y'all remember in episode 1, that's what the therapist said about Tony. But Tony's emotional manipulation got Joan, well, not even got Joan thinking it, but she says it. And it's so, the gaslighting, Joan is being gaslit. Joan is passive. The cycle continues. And if it's not bad enough, then Tony says, "I love you, Joan." That's so emotionally manipulative. It's gaslighting at its finest. And people think that gaslighting is just in romantic relationships, but gaslighting can be friendships. It could be boss to employee. It could be parent to child, but you can see it so clearly. And when when the writers, because she didn't write episode 2, when the writers wrote this, I wonder, because just think, this was 22 years ago. We know about gaslighting. We know about manipulation. We know about emotional abuse. We know about narcissism. It's heavily discussed now, but back then it wasn't discussed like it is now. And there was no social media, no posts, and no videos coming through your timeline. It was none of that then. So this was truly groundbreaking. So now they go into the therapist's office, right? And Dr. Bale says, "Don't come in here lying if you're going to need my help." Like Dr. Bales don't pull no punches. He'd be calling Joan on her stuff. Every time she comes in there, he hits her at the door with the boom, boom, and remember, this is right after he sees Joan and Tony in the restaurant. So when it's her session next, he's like, "Don't be coming up in here lying. How am I going to help you if you're lying to me?" Right? So he then gets Joan all the way together. And I made sure I wrote this down. He was like, he got Joan all the way together. He said, "You can't confront Maya. You let Lynn stay in your home. And you lied about breaking it off with Tony." And then he says this. He says, "Is telling people what you think they want to hear a pattern for you?" Joan is looking like her face is broken. Then he says, "Learn to say no until you can, and learn to say no Until you can learn to say no, you're lying to yourself. Until you can say no, you're lying to yourself. So he gets her together about you can't confront Maya about taking 4-hour lunch breaks during work. You can't confront Lynn. You let her stay in your house. She done brought a man to your house without telling you, taking advantage of you, just sneaking people up in there, freeloading at your, but you let her stay. Then you lie about breaking it off because you don't have the courage enough to break it off with Tony. He's like, it's telling people what they want to hear, a pattern for you. Like, let's get to the getting. You ain't paying me for nothing. So then they get to Joan's house, right? So this is when Lynn sneaks Vasco in the house, and Joan is sitting there in her kitchen, and Lynn and Joan's reaction is kind of mild, right? Because she's naked, she sees a man in there that she doesn't know in her house, and it's dark in the middle of the night. So she's just like, whatever, whatever, just to get out of here so I can go put some clothes on, right? So Bosco's like, well, why are we sneaking? Because it wasn't that bad. She was okay. And Lynn was like, yeah, she's all right. Because Lynn was thinking about Joan before she went to therapy, before she started getting, the nerve to say no. And her instructions from the therapist was to say no, right? So she's like, no, we're good. Joan gets that robe on. She's like, no, he can't stay here. I don't know him. He has to leave. And Lynn was like, well, I know him. She's like, not well enough. So she starts saying no to put her foot down. And Lynn doesn't know how to respond to that. Her friends are used to her saying yes and coddling them and putting her feelings to the side for her friends. She's gone to therapy. She's like, no, we're not doing that anymore. So Lynn thinks she got over, and Joan is like, nope. Joan says, no, get out. He can't stay here. And Lynn was like, well, I'm leaving too. Joan is like, bye. See, they're not used to that. They weren't ready for that, right? And Joan is over it. She's like, no, no. So she's on a no kick. She's like, no. And Lynn is like, she don't know how to handle it, right? So then they go to the law office. Joan is on a roll. William asked Joan to do a work favor. Joan is like, no, I'm not doing it. No. Said no again. So Joan then tells Maya, I love this part because Joan now she's on a no train. So Joan tells Maya she needs to find a place to do her hair after work. Like, you can't be taking 4 hours out of work to go get your hair did, right? And Maya's like, well, what you mean I can't do it after work because that's Jabari and Darnell's time? She said, well, Joan was like, well, you need to teach them how to do your hair. You need to teach them how to do your hair because you ain't going to take advantage of my time, my dime, no more. No. So they get to the restaurant. Now all the ladies are together, right? So Maya and Lynn are complaining about Joan saying no. Because you remember, Joan said no to Maya about getting her hair did. Joan said no to Lynn about Vasco staying there. And they're like, but you can't tell Tony no. That's what Maya and Lynn saying. And of course, Joan ain't trying to hear that. Joan said, I'm seeing a therapist, and Tony remembers there too. So when she said, but you can't tell Tony no, Tony's sitting right there. And Joan says, I'm seeing a therapist. Tony says, if you're seeing a therapist still, because even Joan lied to Tony and said she's not seeing a therapist no more. Right? Because when Tony told her don't see the therapist, she thought Joan listened, right? So then when she finds out, Joan's like, I'm still seeing the therapist. Tony said, if you are still seeing the therapist, we can't be friends no more. Manipulation, emotional manipulation, gaslighting, narcissism. She's showing it all. So how are you going to tell somebody if you decide to see therapy for yourself, a therapist for yourself, then I'm not going to be your friend no more? These are grown women, professional women, that I'm not going to be your friend no more. She's used to manipulating Joan. So I ask you, is that really friendship or is that codependency? It's a wonder how they stay friends so long. Well, no, it's not a wonder because Joan accepted anything. So, of course, you're going to continue to be a friend with somebody who accepts anything. But when they tell you no, how are you responding, right? So Joan says, good, you saved me money in therapy. If you're not going to be my friend, if I see a therapist, then good, right? So they get to the therapist's office. Tony has absolutely no boundaries. Remember the last scene, she's like, well, I'm not going to be your friend no more, right? So Joan goes into her therapist appointment. Guess who's in the lobby? Tony is in the lobby. Tony is in the lobby. Where are the boundaries? How are you going to show up at my therapist appointment? This is not couples therapy, but Tony wanted it to be couples therapy. So Dr. Bales walks out, right? And he sees Tony and Tony and Joan in there. And she's like, well, I think if you're talking to Tony's, I think if you're talking about me, then I need to be in therapy too. We need to do couples therapy. Dr. Bell was like, yeah, maybe another time, but this is Joan's session. And Tony's making such a big stink. He's like, come in the office with all this foolishness. Y'all out in the lobby acting a fool. Come in here, right? So Tony knows no boundaries. She thinks that it's okay for her to do these things. And that's what she does, right? So she's gaslighting. And guess what she says? Tony says, a real friend supports. And she makes fun of Joan taking therapy. Tony says, well, let's just do couples therapy. So let's just talk a minute about Tony's toxic behavior. Like, she had to think that that was okay. You teach people how to treat you. And this is how Joan taught Tony how to treat her since they were little kids. She felt obligated because she was her friend in a new city where no one was her friend. She took up for her. She taught her fashion advice and tips, and she was kind of fly, and Joan wasn't. And this is the dynamic. And some people love those type of dynamics. I'm the leader and you follow me, you do what I say. And it's very toxic. And Tony, they brushed off, that's just Tony. And they allowed Tony to be Tony where she's toxic. Throughout the seasons, Tony gets better when she finds God. We're going to talk about that in seasons to come. She totally changes when Joan was like, I'm not accepting it anymore. And we'll get into that. And she had a come to Jesus meeting, literally. And she became born again and saved. And she was starting to try harder. But she had to lose everything. And we're going to talk about that in seasons and episodes to come. All right, so they go to the law office. It ends at the law office, and William and Maya. And William finds out that Maya is testing him about if she's ready to, if he's really ready to be married to Yvonne. All right, so this was the first episode of Rewatch Girlfriends with Me. Got to work out some kinks. I'm not going to give preliminary in the beginning. I'm just going to start the show like boom and get right into it and get out, make it about 2 episodes. So 2 episodes, each episodes of this show. So the show, maybe I might keep it to like 35 minutes or something like this. This one was a little longer because this was the first episode. So bear with me throughout. It's going to get better and better. We're going to get right to it. Maybe I'll have some Girlfriends fans come on and talk about the episodes with me. And maybe we'll do that. I'm still trying to figure it out. So, but yes, that was season 2, episode 1 and 2. So this show will air every Thursday. Just when you see me live Thursdays. May not be 7 o'clock. It may be a little earlier. I don't know. Figuring that part out. But when you see me go live or you see this, girlfriends, just come on and have the conversation with me. All right. Episode 1 and 2, season 2. Thank y'all so much for watching. I appreciate y'all. God bless. Make sure you continue to watch Girlfriends on Netflix. Keep streaming, keep giving them numbers. Maybe they will keep it on Netflix. I don't see why not, right? Thank y'all so much for watching. God bless. Peace. Make sure you watch it. All right. We out. Rewatch Girlfriends with me, my favorite show and yours, on Thursdays on YouTube. Kendall Anise, let's get it.